Holly Black. I write mostly contemporary folklore-inspired fantasy. My most recent book is The Stolen Heir. And exciting to me, I just finished the final edits on Prisoner's Throne, which is going to be out in March.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Ross. My most recent work is Divine Rivals, which came out this past April. And then Ruthless Vows will be coming out December 26th, so very soon. I write fantasy books for both teens and adults, so I have quite a few other books in my backlist as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Deonn. Will it work if I do it again? Hi, I'm Tracy Deonn. I was kidding. I wrote the Legendborn cycle, starting with Legendborn. Starting with Legendborn and Bloodmark. I just recently announced, like 17 hours ago, that we are doing a third and a fourth book in the Legendborn cycle.
Hello, I'm Chloe Gong. Barely threw yourself into that. I wrote These Foul Delights and most recently Foulheart Huntsman, which closes out the Secret Shanghai universe. And I'm really, really excited for my next YA that is coming and that I can't say anything about. So please just pretend that I teach some really fun stuff.
I'm Cassandra Clare. I'm gonna get my family to do this. My most recent book is Swordcatcher. Currently working on 2 weird projects. I have a Kickstarter for 4 Shadowhunter books that's going on right now. And then the next books I have coming out are the Wicked Powers. That's in the Shadowhunter universe. Probably.
Wow, that was a new sound. So, I was told that our group was selected because we all sit at the borderland between adult and YA. In some cases, we have written adult and YA. And so, the panel creator was curious at what point in your process you decided whether a project was adult or YA. I think we should all jump in as we feel.
Okay, ironically, so with my first book, City of Bones, I remember I had written it and sort of, at least the first half had been sent to publishers, and I had a meeting with a publisher, and they were like, this was 2005, YA fantasy doesn't sell. So would you consider making this adult? And so I went home and I sort of stared at it for a while, and I thought, could I make this adult? Could Clary like be in college? Is Jace worried about his mortgage? Is Simon bald? Like, and I was just, I couldn't do it. I was like, these characters stop being these characters once they're older, and the story stops being the story. So then I had the reverse experience with Swordcatcher. I initially thought this is YA because everything I had done previously was YA, and when I sat down to actually write it, I realized the characters, there's no way that they were teenagers. You know, Lynn, who is the main female character, is a doctor. She's been a doctor for many years, and I was like, there's no way she made it through like 8 years of magic medical school, and she's only 16. And like, you know, one of the other characters is, you know, his arc is about getting married. You know, their arcs were just very much more about sort of the concerns of adults, and so that became an adult book. So I think I don't generally go into a book thinking this is going to be YA or this is going to be adult. The story just sort of happens, and then I can kind of look at it and say this is YA or this is adult.
Go next. My stance when it comes to YA or adult currently has tended to be like, what age am I? Like while I am writing that book. And when I came up with, you know, These Foul Delights, that was because I only had been reading YA. I was 19 at the time. And this is like a crazy question for me to be answering literally sitting next to Cassie, because I was such a YA stan. Like, I was literally running a Tumblr for Cassie's books.
I did not know that.
So I was only reading YA. I loved YA so much. And when I was thinking up, like, what am I gonna write next? These stories are always about, like, the teenage experience. It's about that, like, first entry into the world. It's about a world that you're not really sure, you know, where you're stepping in, but you're gonna learn about it as you go, as opposed to when I got the idea for my adult debut, everything is very established. You've done it already, and now instead of making sense of what role do I hold in the world as I come into it, you're kind of like, okay, I know the world, it kind of sucks. What do I do next? And I feel like that's the adult experience for all the adults in the room.
So my 2 published books thus far are YA books, but what I've noticed, this is an interesting like twist answer, what I've noticed is that a lot of my adult readers are coming to the book and walking away with a feeling of like that their inner child was healed in some way. And I think about a lot about those types of comments. Like, would get them in the signing line, first of all, I think, well, yeah, I mean, I wrote this for my inner child that like needed this story. But I'm also thinking that like there's something really sort of agile and fresh and unmooring about teenage protagonists that like assume, like you're saying, like they're working in a world that often feels fixed and fixed by adults. And then they are in a position to engage with that world and like shift and disrupt it. And I think there's something about that that is what my adult readers are like really clinging to. It's like, well, how agile and how fresh and how rejuvenating could I be also in this world? So that's where I think there's the difference for me would be if I were to write an adult book, I would think similar to what you're saying, Chloe, is that the character is perhaps has assumed or even accepted some of those fixed points that the world has offered, and then I'm giving them an opportunity to reassess, as opposed to a character who comes in and is like, I don't know why this is fixed, why does it have to be, and like it's getting told what it is.
So I kind of accidentally wrote an adult novel. I did not set out to do it. I had started off in YA, so I had 4 published YAs under my belt. And so I was writing the next thing, totally thinking it was going to be my 5th YA novel. And I do something with my critique partner, Isabel Ibanez, where we chapter swap. So as I was writing my book, I was sending her chapters to read. And she made it maybe like into the 3rd chapter, and she'd send me a text, and she's like, is this YA or adult? And I was like, oh no, like if you're asking me that means it's probably like an adult book, and I didn't realize I was doing it. So I was like, let me just keep writing and see what happens. Like I'm not gonna think about that yet. So by the time I got to the end, I felt like it really was like this 50-50, where Jack and Adira felt like the YA arc, which I was very familiar with and I knew, but then Tor and Sidra were like the adult arc. And so I sent it to my agents, like, I don't know what this is, I don't know what to do with it, I don't even know if it's any good. And then I think I just had to realize, like, I think I was ready to write stories about characters that were older. I felt hungrier to tackle topics that I hadn't in my YA, and I think that kind of just bled through my work. And so I decided, let me kind of go back and revise and like, just go ahead and make it fully an adult novel. So I kind of like entered it into like a really like, wasn't planning on it, it just kind of happened, which I think sometimes when you're writing a book, sometimes it just magic happens, you don't plan on things.
I think, yeah, I accidentally wound up writing YA in that way. Like I thought I wrote I wrote a bunch of my first book, Tide, and I had read, and back in the year 2000, I'm not lying, my friend said to me, I think this might be a YA novel. And I, at that time, was like, surely not. There's lots of, books about 16-year-olds that are adults. And, it's a story about how she discovers she's a fairy changeling. So I thought that if she, had discovered that later in life, she wouldn't look like the sharpest knife in the drawer. And my friend who gave me, I think, a copy of Garth Nix's Sabriel, and was like, here, look, YA isn't what, it isn't what you remember. And so I sort of like stumbled into it at a pretty early stage in it kind of blowing up. And then when I decided I wanted to write an adult novel, I did it very deliberately, and I had to figure out, wait, what is an adult novel? But so to build on this, because I was asking you sort of at what point, I'm also curious, and I, would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because this speaks to my interest. What is your process? What is when you approach your work, when you first have an idea? How do you develop it? Do you have like note cards, outlines, musing while walking, expensive holidays, mushrooms in the forest, starting writing and seeing what comes out? And then what do you need to have before you actually jump in?
I can take this one first. So my process is, I definitely look for the big images and the big moments. So, and I sometimes reverse engineer out of the ending and sort of the feeling I want to have, the feeling I want the main character to have. So I do think about those big things, but before I even do that, I think about what's the question that this character is wrestling with in this book, which is a very like academic approach. Like, what's the question of your research? But like, it's a little bit like that. Like, what is she looking to? What does she think she wants? What is it that she thinks she wants? What do I know she needs? And like, what's the question she's asking? And how is it the wrong question often? Is like what I need to know. And then like, once I work through that question and I think about the big sort of set piece sort of images, then I go back and I start an outline. I love an outline, and my system just wants an outline, like about everything. My anxiety wants an outline. Like all parts of me want an outline. I never follow the outline.
The outline for Chain of Thorns was 60,000 words, which is a book, but it was an outline, and it's, with everything that was happening in every chapter, every scene. And I don't always stick with it. Obviously, if something's not working, then you can kind of see that in the outline. You can go in and you can tinker with it, or you will figure out as you write through it, you sort of like run the rat through the maze that you built. You'll realize, oh, that's a dead end, and then you kind of have to go in and tinker with it, figure out how it's not working, why it seemed like it would work in outline form, but now it doesn't work in this form. But that is pretty much my process, and I do a lot of also work of just sort of talking things over with my friends. So Holly, my friend Kelly Ling, a bunch of my other friends, we tend to have a lot of sort of group meetings. Often we'll meet like at the beginning of a book when it's first being planned, and then we'll meet, once the first draft is done, and so we're really like very familiar with each other's work, which I think is really helpful because then I can kind of, show that, go over the book with them, and it's much easier to have those conversations about like, well, this, I don't think so-and-so would do this, but I need this to happen, so is there another way for that to happen? And for me, it's really, really useful to have those critique partners that I can work with.
I just think there's something really powerful about writing by hand and like seeing my words on a page, and then it's almost like I can go back years ago and like see, oh yeah, this is like where Sisters of Sword and Song began in this journal. But usually like I'll write a line down, or I'll envision a character, because I'm a very character-driven writer, and I will start asking questions like, well, who are you? Like, where are you? And I'll build the world up around them. Like what Cassie was saying, I write by the seat of my pants. So I'm a discovery writer, so I take this idea, and usually I might try to I always remember Lainey Taylor said something that really stuck with me, which was like, writing a book is like making fire, where you have two ideas that you strike together to make a flame. So sometimes when I have a really good idea, but it's not going anywhere, I'm just missing the other idea that it needs. So kind of strike them together, make a fire, and typically by this point I know when I have something good, like a story has legs, but I definitely discover it as I go, which can be very exciting, also very scary. I write myself in a corner sometimes, like, where am I going? So it is nice to have those friends you can bounce ideas off of as well. But it does make for really tough revisions, because I put it all down on the page and have to okay, how am I going to weave everything together to make sure there's no plot holes and things like that.
I love stationery. I love this excuse to use more stationery. So Cassie was actually telling me about going to a museum in London recently where they had a big fantasy exhibit, and they had gridded out Robin Hobb's whole series on the wall, and it was just all of these branching arms. And when we were talking about it, thinking about how fantasy requires an initial investment, right? You need to, as a reader, learn a world. And once you've learned it, you know, there's a motive to stay in it and to explore it more. And so I was going to ask, how you build a world that can be expanded in sort of, and can branch out, or whether or not that's not at all a consideration.
So I guess I could, do you want to start, Cass?
Nope, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it is a big question. Can I just reverse 1 second and just comment about your journals? And then I'll answer the question, I promise. So I love that you buy a new journal for each book and write in it. I do the first step only, where I buy the journal. And I just wanted to say, like, I'm so glad that you do the second step, because, like, it gives me some hope. But I only do that one, and I get so excited. But yeah.
Well, sometimes if you buy a really nice journal, then you're almost scared to write in it. So then it has to be a journal that you're okay, like, to completely, like, write in.
That's the trick.
I just started this process of buying a new journal. And it's funny, it made me think of Lana Taylor, because she decoupages a journal for all her projects.
Oh man.
Which is some kind of level beyond.
Yeah, I'm not doing all the things.
I know, Jay, like, whoa, decoupage, that's commitment. I decided to try to keep a dream journal, because so many people are like, I get great ideas in my dreams, and I always have this feeling when I'm falling asleep that I had a brilliant idea, and I'm like, I'll remember it in the morning. And I never do remember it in the morning, so I got a book, and I was like, okay, keep it by the side of my bed, I'm gonna write down my ideas. And when I woke up in the morning, I was like, these ideas are terrible. These are not good ideas.
This is just my subconscious working through some stuff.
I know, exactly. I'm like, Simon becomes ice cream cone. Nope, not a good idea.
I'd read that.
Okay, it has potential.
Bonus content. It's the AU. Okay, so world. So I grew up. My mother was a fangirl. I grew up with fandom, and one thing that I really, really love about my favorite stories and worlds is that they feel like they persist, right? When I look away, either like literally or metaphorically, I feel like the world is still going. And so I try and build in as much sort of like, not loose threads, but just like crack open enough doors along the way. Not only for myself, because I can write myself into a corner if I'm really too strict, but also just this idea that like there's something else going on. This person's having a whole other experience with this type of magic, or like for them the experience is different than what you're getting from the main character. For Legendborn, I specifically wanted to write a magic system that is, eternal. The idea of it was that it would have started in the 6th century and it's still going today, which gave me some room, right? So like, readers have asked, like, are you ever gonna do a prequel? Are you ever gonna like jump ahead? Like, what are you gonna do? And I was like, well, luckily, like I wrote a really long road. Like, so I could go back a generation and see what's going on with that. Cass, you did the same thing. Like, this idea that there's sort of this persistence of magic or rules that even gets passed from generation to the next, I think is really, it's a good trick, and it gives you a little bit of wiggle room in terms of if you ever write yourself into a corner, you can be like, okay, but that was just them. Actually, if you look at it from this perspective, this person's having a whole other different experience, and like sometimes you can make it, you can go back and like weave that in, but I find that leaving little openings like that is just gold. And also there's just some stuff that I know I'm not gonna write, but I love the idea of suggesting to the reader and inviting their brain to fill in the blank, like somewhat like making offhand comments about how magic happened or how a world happened, how some sort of consequence befell this other character, but we never go down that road. It's just like a side note. Like, I love that stuff.
I think I agree with you, and I think it's all of those things hint at a big world, without you having to put the whole big world, say, into book one where it would be overwhelming. You're hinting at the largeness of the world. And I remember going into writing Shadowhunters, I was like, I want a big, flexible world that a lot of stories can be told in. I was a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. What's not, But I was always driven insane by the fact that Buffy appeared to be one person who was dealing locally with a problem that was clearly global. I was like, who is killing all the vampires in like Moscow? Like, what about Shanghai? Is everyone there just being eaten? Like, how is this, like, how, she's only in one place. It drove me insane. And so I was like, okay, you know, I want to make it really clear that Shadowhunters are a global organization. They're all over the world. They exist everywhere. They've existed for a really long time. There are generations and generations of, there are families, but there are multiple families. And so I think, you know, you don't have to do this. You know, it depends on whether you want to create a world in which you're telling like one like tightly woven story, or are you know, opening up the possibility of telling multiple stories in this world. And I think when you do that, you want to, you know, to create a situation in which magic you know, and the rules of it have persisted for a long time, and that you have, you know, this global big world, and that you have the idea of just something that's been around for a long time, and that there's some flexibility to it
that you can maybe latch on to later. Because I do think there's a real value in, for instance, not making decisions about things that you don't need to make decisions about for a book, so that you don't have to then give into them later. I think there's room really for that for there to be like Here Lies Dragons, you know, business in books.
So I did a short story for Star Wars Empire Strikes Back anniversary and launch. Thank you. But so it was my little taste of working, and there are authors in the room who have much work since they were Star Wars, so they understand this. But Star Wars is an interesting example because they have a story group, and they're sort of like the keeper of the world, the lore, right? And some of the notes that I got back, it was only in a couple places where I realized that I had like sort of crossed a story group rule, which was I made something definitive. And it wasn't even like hardcore definitive. It was like this many years, and they were like, no, we don't want to say that. And I was like, well then, and then this person did this, and they were like, no, can't say that. And I realized what they were doing. They were leaving things open because they were like, we cannot create all the content in this universe and allow everyone to make hard and fast rules, because we have to be able to keep expanding it. They have, you know, incoming authors, writers, screenwriters, like they have to be able to allow these things to flexibly hang together. So me and my like declaration of even just, I was like 3 millennia, and they were like, no. I was like, oh, okay. Like, so it didn't feel like a wrist slap, it felt like an educational opportunity for me as someone who builds worlds. I was like, oh, I see what you're doing, you're allowing yourself room.
I almost feel like sometimes when it comes to an expansive world, it also has to do with how attached readers feel to the characters they first meet. Because when you think about, you know, the fandoms or the fan bases that are the most prominent, they feel sticky in some way. You just can't quite leave them, even when the books have ended, the movies have ended, right? When you hit the end of the franchise itself, the readership, they keep going, because they keep speculating on like, what is this character doing now, like in this place, or just the most random, like sometimes I'll get comments being like, do you think this character would ever own a cat? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. But it doesn't matter what I say, it actually has nothing to do with it. It's actually all about that reader who sits there in their spare time thinking, I wonder if Juliet's a cat person or a dog person. You know, it makes that world suddenly feel bigger because it continues in their head. And I think it somewhat circles around how sticky that character is to them. And when you do keep expanding and expanding and expanding, it's finding the right people to be telling you pieces of that world. And when I went into it, I kind of knew I wanted to do a very small segment of 1920 Shanghai, but if people were to write fanfic about it, there are all of these like scattered pieces across the city that you could jump right into and be like, maybe there's a gang here, maybe there's a scientific experiment going on in this part of the city. So yeah, it's openness, and then it's giving them like the potential to have their own musing and be like, actually, this would work. I'm gonna keep thinking about this.
I like this idea of sticky characters. Like,
I stole that word from Roshni Chokshi.
okay, sure, Roshni. Yeah, no, but that's real. Like the way that I say it is like that my readers have taken my characters home with them. And I love that they've done that, and I'm like, thank you for taking them home. Like, and a couple of times I've had readers be like, oh, well, you know, my headcanon about this is that, and I know that's not what you wrote. And I'm like, listen, the version of the version of Cell in your head is a valid version. He is not the Cell I'm writing. That's a different person. But like the one you've taken home with you, like, yeah, I guess he does, whatever, ride a motorcycle or whatever, you know what I mean? And I just, but to give, I think there is something really lovely about, and I think we all do this, letting readers know they have permission to do that. Take the character home, let them be sticky. I'm inviting you to like let this person live in your mind. And I think that's really, I love that we're talking about this in fantasy as well. Like I think there's something about the type of realism we give characters in fantastical worlds that helps make them sticky.
Well, because the characters in fantasy have to be real, because they have to have a degree of psychological realism that is very pronounced because you're asking people to buy into all of this fantastical business. So if you're like, okay, all of this fantastical business, you know, there are, you know, unicorn hunters or demon hunters or, you know, what magical warriors or whatever you're asking people to believe, they have to believe in the people. Because if they don't believe in the people, they're not going to believe in any of the rest of it. So I feel like in a lot of ways we have to be very specific about the realism of our characters and how much they feel like human beings who are reacting like human beings would in that situation.
Do you feel at all like, sometimes I feel conflicted when people ask me questions, like for instance, would, you know, so-and-so have a cat or something? Like because I think there's like, I think there is a desire to know more about that character, to engage with people, and to like be able to give out information. And I also think that for me, there's a desire to leave that space open. You know, like you were saying, like to leave space for people to kind of put their own business in there. And so, like, do you feel like, where do you sit on that spectrum of like just answering them like no cats, allergic, or like, you know, like make up, you know, exactly, like make the decision that you really want to make. Maybe they have a parrot, you know, you choose.
I'll say, so I actually had someone in my signing line ask me a question about River Enchanted and Fire Endless, two of the characters. So like what happens to them after Fire Endless? And I answered because I had already thought about it, so I had, like, no one had ever asked me, and I don't want to spoil anything, but it was just kind of interesting that she's like, hey, what about this? It's like, oh, well, this is what it would be. Yeah. And I just thought that was really cool, but I also have, like, with one of my standalones, the very last chapter, I wanted it to be very thought-provoking and almost like a reader to interpret, like, what happens next to Clem. And so sometimes editors, like, they do want to, like, what exactly happens? But I honestly want to, like, what do you think happens? Like, I want to kind of hear, like, engage with readers on that and hear what you think.
I think I've actually sort of stopped answering some of those questions. Like, honestly, because well, first of all, one time, and I won't say what it is, one time I answered, and then I just didn't remember the answer because it was, like, off the cuff. And then I said something later that kind of contradicted it. And I was like, one day this is gonna come back and bite me in the butt. And it was because I'm like, because speaking, at this point, my speech about the character is canon, right? And like, which is a level of power that like, from someone who came up in fandom, I completely understand. But at some point earlier in the process, I could just say that, right? But then now they're like, well, you could, well, but, you know, March of 2021, in this one off-the-cuff interview you did, you said he did this, and then now you're saying he did this? Which one is it? And I'm like, neither. Like the Cell that I'm talking about, or the Nick or the Bree that I'm talking about in a live panel is like not the one in my books. So I started to sort of just be like, your version of that character has a cat. Congratulations. But like mine, I don't know, you know, like just sort of trying to make some distinction there between like what I write and sit with for months on end, what I say in a panel right here, and then what someone else might want to hang out with, you know, mentally for themselves.
Well, you're saying what's canon, right?
Yes.
So, I don't know, I do think it is a complicated question. I remember at some point saying something, I don't know if it was online or in person, about an earlier version of a book in which different things had happened, and it really freaked people out. They were like, so is that the real version? And I was like, no, the real version is the final version. The book exists in a quantum state, like until it's published, and then it is what it is, you know, but like the idea that there are all of these existing versions previously where different things happen, I think is kind of freaky. Also, I once asked my husband to look up what the most popular Shadowhunters fanfiction was on AO3, and it was a story where Magnus is the High Warlock of Seoul and he is in a polyamorous relationship with BTS. And I was like, valid. That's what happened.
The internet is so vast now, like more so than ever. I think if anyone says, if the author in particular says something on a panel, someone's filming somewhere, and it's about to get uploaded onto TikTok, and then suddenly 10,000 people have heard this like canon declaration that this one character has a cat, and now it's just in the lore, and it's going to go up on the like wiki in 5 minutes as well. And the thing is that once that is a possibility, you start realizing, okay, it needs to be reserved for the things on the page, because that's what you've thought about, that's what you've edited, and that's what everyone has decided, okay, that is going into the canon. I have made some mistakes where I'm like, yeah, maybe this is like, this character would be this star sign, and then people are like, but then what about in the page when, like, there was a full moon on their birthday, but in this year there was no full moon. I'm like, you know what, never mind. I didn't say anything, they're not a Scorpio. So I have toned down on the declaring facts in person.
So apparently, so I got a 5-minute sign about 5 minutes ago. So I do not think I will be able to get you guys to ask a question, but I'm going to ask you one final question. Okay? You guys ready? All right. So when you thought about being a writer, what did you think it would be like? And what is the biggest thing that is not like that? And I will tell you, I thought I would be alone in my house, but I'm here. Is it just like you pictured? Is it nothing like you pictured?
So every time how do I say this? There's a lot of admin. Just a lot of emails. A lot of documents, a lot of things to approve, a lot of things to review. And so I just thought that I was going to be in my house writing my little stories. And I would write my little stories, and I would do it super efficiently, and then I would turn them in, and then they would get printed, and then I would go back and write some more little stories. I did not think about the sort of like the certain level of like being your own administrative, sort of like really thinking really deeply and carefully about like what you're approving to go out that is connected to your work. Yeah, that's been surprising. Lots of spreadsheets.
No argument. Yeah, I think I thought it would be really glamorous.
Isn't it?
I mean, I find it to be a ping-ponging between things that are kind of fun and glamorous, like getting to hang out with you guys, very glamorous. You know, getting to meet cool writers, getting to do a signing line for lots of people who are excited about your books. All that stuff is glamorous, but I was just touring the UK, and for some reason, I don't remember why this happened, I had to drive from Edinburgh to Liverpool to do an event, which is like a 6 or 7 hour drive. Got there, couldn't get into the hotel, had to drag all my suitcases into the back of the theater, was filthy, needed to shower before the event. There was a shower because it was a theater, but there were no towels or soap, so I had a small packet of hand soap and had to take a shower with a small packet of hand soap and dry myself with paper towels. And I was like, not glamorous. So it's a mix.
You're like, we've all had that experience of arriving at a hotel. The hotel check-in's at 4 p.m. You're like, oh, great, it's 9 a.m. That's fun.
And they're like, you can hang out in the lobby, and then they're sorry because you just lie down on the floor and go to sleep.
Didn't we text Chloe about sad tour salad?
Oh.
Yeah.
Sad tour salad is totally a thing. I actually took a picture of, because I ate the same thing every day on tour in the UK, which was a cold cup of coffee and like a plastic wrap sandwich from a gas station. And so I ended up taking pictures of them all. I'm not sure, like, in my delirious mind, if I was like, this is going to be an art project and called like the sad sandwich tour. It's totally a thing.
My first first tour, so far, my only tour really. I think I texted Victoria Aveyard and I was just like, tips please? And she was like, you can never mess up a Caesar salad and fries. It's the only thing that you can consistently ask for. And I was like, I'm sure there are places that can mess up both of those things. But I will say, she was right. At least for this tour, I was like, you know what? This is consistently, it's like a combination of filling and good, and like, I'm actually working this out. But at some point, it's still sad, right? No, like at the end of the day, the conclusion, it's like you add it all together, conclusion, still sad. Still a sad tour salad.
I will say, when I had to stop on the Divine Rivals tour with Rita Barron, and when I wanted to try to get dinner with everybody beforehand, because some of these, I was like meeting these people for the first time, it's like, hi, at dinner, and the restaurant, it was great, but it was like running really slow, so we like ordered our food and we're like waiting, and he's like, oh, we gotta go. It's like, can you just box up our food and we'll just eat it afterwards? And so thankfully the bookstore had a fridge, so they put our food in the fridge. So then you do the event and the signing, and then by then it's like 9, and I had dinner, and so then I was going back to the hotel, and I get in my room, and I realized like I had gotten a salad, and I didn't have like fork or anything, so I was just like sitting on the bed, like eating with my hands, and it was a really good salad. But also just thinking what you were saying, Tracy, like I heard someone say, I wish that being an author, I wish I'd known that I should take like a communication class, learn how to do public speaking. Graphic design, so I can know how to make like a pretty graphic, put a quote on it, and then accounting, because like totally not a math person, so it's been like, oh my goodness. So that always stuck with me. It's like, yeah, I did take the communications class in college that was required, but I would have really benefited from some like graphic design and like something about taxes and things like that.
I'll just add really quickly, I still don't understand taxes. I'm really afraid constantly I'm committing some sort of tax fraud. I'm not American, so there's an extra layer of it where I'm like, am I also supposed to be paying tax to New Zealand? And I could be imprisoned any day. So let's just please pray that I'm paying my taxes right.
And on that note,
Let's give it up for our 5 p.m. Spotlight panel.